I thought I took a wrong turn until the same car was already waiting ahead. I honestly thought the worst part of that night was going to be the drive itself. That was all I was worried about when I left Bristol. Not being followed, not getting stranded, not ending up somewhere I still don't fully understand even now. I was just tired, behind schedule, and annoyed with myself, in that way you get when you know the whole mess is your own fault. My aunt had been taken into hospital up in North Yorkshire that afternoon, and my mom had rung me twice asking whether I was still coming. I should have left hours earlier, but work dragged on. Then I had to go home for a change of clothes. Then I stood in my kitchen staring at my keys for about 10 minutes, already feeling too drained to make the drive. If I'm being honest, I nearly stayed home. I nearly rang and said I'd come in the morning. But then you start imagining the phone call you don't want to get while you're asleep, and suddenly being tired doesn't feel like much of an excuse anymore. So I set off just after 8:30, telling myself it would be fine once I got moving. And for a while it was. The motorways were dull more than anything. Patchy rain, lorries in the left lane, that yellow-white glare of headlights on wet tarmac. The sort of drive where you don't really remember 10-mile stretches because they all look the same. I had the heater on too high, a coffee going cold in the cup holder, and the radio turned down low because every voice on there started to get on my nerves after a bit. I was tired enough that little things felt too loud. The sat-nav kept interrupting with those clipped, cheerful directions, and every time it spoke, I felt oddly irritated, like even that was one more demand on me. By the time I was north of Sheffield, the roads had thinned out properly. The rain had eased off, but the sky had that heavy black look to it. No stars, just low cloud pressing down over everything. There's a certain kind of darkness you get once you leave the big roads behind in England. It isn't dramatic, it's just complete. The kind where your headlights don't seem to light the road so much as cut a narrow tunnel through it, and everything outside that tunnel feels as if it's waiting. I've always hated that sort of driving, especially on my own. You pass one dim village, a closed pub, maybe a boarded petrol station, then nothing for miles but hedges and fields and the odd stand of trees. It makes you feel very small very quickly. I kept trying to stay sensible about it. I told myself I was overthinking because I was tired. I cracked the window a bit to get cold air in. I changed playlists twice. I even said out loud, "Get a grip, Naomi," which is something I do when I know I'm working myself up over nothing. And for another half hour or so, everything did seem fine. Empty road, a few road signs, the sat-nav counting down roundabouts and turnings in that steady little voice. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would have made me remember that stretch of road if the rest hadn't happened. The first thing that felt wrong was so small, I nearly ignored it. The sat-nav told me to take a slip road off the A road I've been following for the better part of an hour. I moved over too late, saw the turning at the last second, and missed it. That alone wasn't unusual. I've done that before, especially when I'm tired. Usually you swear under your breath, drive to the next junction, and lose 10 minutes. That's all I thought it was. A nuisance. I remember actually rolling my eyes and saying, "Brilliant," to absolutely no one. Then I waited for the sat-nav to recalculate. It didn't. The map froze for a second, then the route line vanished altogether. The screen just showed my car icon moving along a dark road with fields on both sides and the word recalculating blinking in the corner. I waited. Nothing. My phone signal, which had already been dropping in and out, went to one bar and then disappeared completely. I kept driving, expecting another turning, but the road ahead looked increasingly wrong for what was meant to be a main route. The central barrier vanished. Then the second lane did. What had been a broad, quiet A road narrowed into a carriageway that felt strangely neglected, as if traffic had simply stopped using it years ago. The cat's eyes became patchier. The white paint on the edges faded out in places. Even the surface changed. I could feel more vibration through the steering wheel, little tremors as the tires passed over rough tarmac and shallow dips. It didn't feel like the sort of road that led anywhere useful. I checked the time. 11:47. That bothered me more than it should have. Midnight always changes the mood of a drive. Before that, it still feels like you're out late. After that, it feels as if you're somewhere you shouldn't be. I remember looking in my rearview mirror then, half expecting to see headlights behind me, just for the comfort of knowing there was another person on the road. But there was nothing. Not one car. Not even a distant pair of lights. Just the black shape of the road falling away behind me. A mile or so later, I passed an old bus stop on the left. Not a proper modern one, just a narrow lay-by with a cracked concrete shelter and a timetable case on a post. The shelter had no glass left in it, only the frame, and someone had spray painted the inside. I only caught it in the edge of my headlights, but what stuck with me was that there was a suitcase sitting under the bench inside. A hard shell one, dark in color, standing upright like somebody had just left it there and meant to come back. That was the first detail that made the back of my neck go cold. It was such an ordinary object to see in such a wrong place. Not dumped in a ditch, not torn open, just left there neatly under a bus shelter in the middle of nowhere at nearly midnight, on a road that suddenly didn't feel connected to anything. I actually glanced at the mirror again, tempted for a second to turn round and make sure I hadn't imagined it. But the road had become so narrow by then, with thick hedges rising on both sides and no visible opening to turn into, that I kept going. I told myself there'd be a village ahead, or a roundabout, or even just a proper junction where I could stop and get my bearings. What I didn't expect was for the road signs to start making less sense the farther I went. The next sign I passed was one of those battered local ones, white with black lettering, half hidden by overgrown branches. I had to slow down to read it. One arrow pointed left to a place name I didn't recognize at all. Another pointed straight on to somewhere called Mere Hollow. No distance given, no road number, just the name. I don't know why that unsettled me as much as it did. Maybe because I'd lived in England my whole life and I'd never once heard of a place called Mere Hollow. And yet on that road, it felt as if I'd somehow ended up on a route meant for people who already knew where they were going. I glanced at my phone again. Still no service. The sat-nav had come back to life for a second, but now the map looked odd, zoomed too far out and stripped of detail, as if the roads around me weren't loading properly. My car icon moved forward across a blank dark patch with only one thin line ahead of it. No side roads, no alternate route, nothing. That's when I started getting properly tense. Not panicked yet. Just that tight, alert feeling where you stop singing along to the radio, stop taking sips of your drink, stop doing anything except watching the road. My shoulders had crept up toward my ears. Every bend looked too sharp. Every overhanging branch looked like it was reaching into the beam of the headlights. There were fields somewhere beyond the hedges, I assumed, but I couldn't see them. At one point, the lane dipped, and I caught the smell of standing water and mud coming in through the cracked window, and for some reason that earthy, cold smell made me feel even more alone. Then the road bent slightly right, and I saw the car. It was parked on the verge ahead on the left, partially tucked into a muddy pull-in. Silver Estate, hazard lights blinking in a slow amber rhythm, no interior light on, no one standing outside. For one ridiculous second, I felt relieved, just because it was evidence that another human being existed within miles of me. But that feeling vanished almost at once. As I got closer, I could see the rear offside door wasn't shut properly. It was open just a few inches, enough to show a black line of gap into the dark interior. That was odd enough. What made it worse was the driver's door was closed, and there was no sign of anyone nearby, no torchlight, no movement, nothing in the mirrors after I passed. Just that car left there as if somebody had climbed out and walked straight into the hedges. I didn't stop. I wish I could say I considered it properly, that I had some moral debate with myself about helping, but the truth is I saw that half-open back door, and every instinct in me said keep driving. The moment I passed it, I locked my doors. I always lock them when I'm driving at night anyway, but that time it was automatic, sharp, almost embarrassing in how frightened it made me feel. I laughed once, nervously, and said, "You're being stupid." But my own voice sounded thin in the car, and the laugh died straight away. The road ahead seemed even darker after that, the hedges taller, the silence heavier. I started noticing little things I hadn't before. Reflector posts leaning at strange angles, puddles shining black in dips of the lane, bits of branch scattered over the verge as if a storm had gone through earlier. A few minutes later, I reached what looked like the edge of a village, except it wasn't one. There were no houses. Only a row of old stone gate posts on one side and a faded sign for a garden center that must have shut years ago. The lettering had peeled and the metal backing was rusting through. Beneath it, someone had nailed up a smaller homemade notice with red paint. Private road, no turning. The sign pointed down a narrower lane, disappearing between tall fir trees. I drove past it and felt my chest tighten. That was when I realized how badly I needed to turn around. Not in the casual sense from earlier. Not because I was delayed. Because something about the road now felt committed, as though every extra mile I drove was taking me somewhere harder to leave. I slowed right down, scanning for a farm entrance, a gate, a wide verge, anywhere I could do a three-point turn. But the hedges had become banks, steep and muddy, and the drop on the left side looked deeper than I thought. If I misjudged it in the dark, I could have slid into a ditch and really been stuck. So I kept going, slowly, hands tight on the wheel, heart beating that bit harder than it should have done. I wish I could tell you there was one clear moment when the fear started, something obvious enough that any sane person would have felt it too. But it wasn't like that. It was more like every normal thing was being removed one at a time. First the traffic, then the phone signal, then the proper road markings, then the signs I recognized, then the sense that if something happened, someone would come along. And once that feeling had gone, everything else changed. Even the dark looked different. Up ahead, the road dipped again and vanished briefly beneath a stand of trees that leaned toward each other overhead, forming a kind of tunnel. My headlights caught trunks wet from old rain, pale bark shining for a second and then gone. Beyond them, I could see no lights at all, no farmhouse windows, no porch lamps in the distance, no orange glow from a nearby town, just blackness. I remember thinking very clearly I should not be here. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some sixth sense or anything like that. Just a blunt, exhausted certainty. Wrong road, wrong hour, wrong place to be alone. And once that thought landed, I couldn't shake it. I slowed almost to a crawl beneath the trees and looked for somewhere to stop. My breathing had gone shallow. I could feel every thump of my pulse in my throat. Somewhere above the roof of the car, branches scraped together in the wind with a dry, whispering sound, and I hated how much it sounded like movement. There was a gateway ahead on the right, old iron bars hanging open onto what looked like a gravel track. A weathered wooden board beside it had once had a name painted on it, but the letters were faded almost beyond reading. I could only make out the beginning. Ash. I pulled in just enough to get off the lane and stopped. For a second, I just sat there listening to the engine idle, staring at my own face reflected faintly in the windscreen. I looked terrible, tired eyes, skin gone pale in the dashboard glow, mouth set tight in that way mine does when I'm trying not to upset myself. It struck me then how alone I was, and not in the abstract way people say it, properly alone. If I screamed, no one would hear it. If my car died, I had no signal. If someone knocked on the window, I would have absolutely no idea whether to trust them. I put the car into park and reached for my phone again anyway, like somehow the signal might have come back through sheer desperation. Still nothing. Outside, the darkness beyond the windscreen seemed thick enough to press against the glass. And that was where it truly began. I stayed in the car longer than I probably should have. Looking back, I think I was trying to convince myself that stopping had been the sensible thing to do. That this, pulling in, taking a minute, getting my bearings, was me taking control of the situation, instead of just driving blindly deeper into somewhere I didn't recognize. But the longer I sat there, the more that feeling started to slip. The engine was still running, low and steady, but everything outside of it felt wrong in a way I couldn't quite explain. It wasn't just the dark. I'd driven plenty of country roads at night before. This was something else. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt occupied, like there was space around me, but it wasn't unclaimed. I remember gripping the steering wheel and telling myself, right, just turn around, get back to the main road. That's it. Simple, practical, nothing dramatic. I even nodded, like I was agreeing with someone else in the car. But I didn't move. because something kept pulling my attention toward the gateway on my right. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just that same uncomfortable feeling I'd had when I saw the suitcase at the bus stop. Something ordinary sitting in the wrong place. The gravel track beyond the gate disappeared almost immediately into the trees, swallowed up by the dark. No lights, no sign of a house, no tire tracks I could clearly see from where I was sitting. It looked like it hadn't been used in a long time. And yet, there was a faint glow deeper in there. Not bright enough to be a torch, not steady enough to be a proper light. Just something pale and intermittent, like a reflection catching at odd angles. I leaned forward slightly, squinting through the windscreen, trying to figure out what I was seeing. For a second, I thought it might have been the reflection of my own headlights bouncing off something metallic further in. That would have made sense. Something left out there. Old machinery, maybe, but the longer I looked, the less it felt like that. It wasn't fixed. It shifted. Just slightly. Not in a way I could track properly, but enough that my brain refused to settle on it being an object. It felt more like movement without direction. Like something turning its head, just out of sight. I swallowed and sat back. "Don't," I muttered under my breath. "Don't start that." I forced myself to look away from the gateway and back to the road ahead. That was what mattered. Getting out, getting back to somewhere normal, somewhere lit, somewhere with people. But then I noticed something else, the engine sound. It hadn't changed exactly, but once I became aware of it, I realized it was the only sound I could hear. No wind now, no branches scraping, no distant noise of anything at all, just the low hum of the car. It made everything else feel even more unnatural, like the world outside had been muted. And that's when I realized something that made my stomach drop. I hadn't seen a single house for miles. Not one window, not one light, not even the outline of a farmhouse set back from the road. Just hedges, trees, and empty stretches of land I couldn't even see properly. I knew rural areas could be like that, but this felt excessive. Like I'd driven off the edge of somewhere mapped and into a space that people didn't really pass through. I reached for the gear stick again. "Just go," I said, more firmly this time. But before I could move, something flickered again in the gateway. Closer now. That same faint, pale shift in the dark. My chest tightened instantly, and without meaning to, I leaned toward it again. I told myself I was just checking, just making sure it wasn't something simple, something explainable. But there was a part of me already bracing for the opposite. At first, I couldn't see anything clearly, just the shapes of the trees, black against a slightly lighter black sky, the gravel path fading out of sight. And then, something was standing there. I didn't see it arrive. I didn't see it move into place. It was just suddenly there. A shape slightly darker than the dark around it, positioned just beyond where my headlights properly reached. Tall, still, facing toward me. I froze. For a second, my brain refused to process it. I actually blinked a few times, like that might reset whatever I was seeing. I even leaned forward again, squinting, trying to force the shape into something else. A post, a tree trunk, a trick of light. But it didn't change. It stayed exactly where it was. And the worst part was, the longer I looked, the more certain I became that it wasn't just standing there. It was looking at me. That was the moment the fear really hit. Not a slow build, not unease. Proper physical fear that tightened everything in my chest and made my hands go cold. My first instinct was to lock the doors again, even though they were already locked. My second was to reach for my phone, even though I knew there was no signal. It was like my body had skipped ahead of my thoughts entirely, already reacting to something my mind hadn't caught up with yet. I whispered, "No," without even realizing I'd said it. The figure didn't move, didn't wave, didn't step forward, just stood there, completely still, as if it had been waiting in that exact spot long before I arrived. I felt this horrible creeping certainty settle in, that it hadn't just wandered there, that it hadn't just happened to be in the right place at the wrong time. It felt deliberate, like I'd stopped exactly where I was meant to. My breathing had gone shallow again. I could hear it now, loud in the quiet of the car. I forced myself to look away, dragging my gaze back to the road in front of me. "That's enough," I said, more sharply now. "You're leaving." I didn't give myself time to hesitate. I shifted the car into gear and pulled back onto the lane, tires crunching slightly on the edge of the gravel before catching the tarmac again. I didn't check the gateway again. I didn't want to confirm whether it was still there or not. I just drove, faster than I had been before. The lane stretched ahead, bending gently between the hedges, and for a moment I felt a flicker of relief. Movement helped. It broke whatever strange hold that place had on me. The car felt like safety again. Something solid, something controllable. But that feeling didn't last, because as I glanced into the rearview mirror, I saw something I hadn't expected. Movement, not on the road, behind me. At the edge of the headlights, fading into darkness, I couldn't see clearly enough to make it out properly. Just a suggestion of motion where there hadn't been any before. Something stepping out from the gateway, onto the road, following. I gripped the wheel tighter, my pulse suddenly hammering in my ears. Don't look, I told myself. But of course I did, just for a second. And in that second, I saw enough to make everything inside me drop. The figure was on the lane now, walking, not running, not rushing, just walking at a steady, unhurried pace in the exact direction I'd driven. Toward me or after me. I couldn't tell which felt worse. I pushed the accelerator down harder without thinking, the engine rising in pitch as the car picked up speed. The hedges blurred slightly at the edges of my vision, the narrowness of the lane suddenly feeling far more dangerous than it had before. One wrong move and I'd be in a ditch. But slowing down didn't feel like an option anymore. I checked the mirror again. The figure was still there, still walking, still not hurrying, and somehow that made it so much worse, because it didn't need to. It felt like it already knew something I didn't. Something about the road, something about where I was going, something about how far I'd get before I realized I hadn't actually left anything behind at all. I don't know how long I drove like that. It couldn't have been more than a few minutes, but it felt longer, because once that kind of fear sets in, time stops behaving normally. Every second stretches out. Every glance in the mirror feels like a risk, and your mind keeps jumping ahead, trying to predict something it doesn't understand. I kept telling myself it didn't make sense. That was the only thing I had left to hold on to. He's too far back. He's on foot. You're in a car. There was no way he could keep up with me, and yet I still checked the mirror, again and again, each time expecting to see nothing, each time half hoping I'd imagine the whole thing. But I hadn't. The figure stayed in view far longer than it should have. Not close, not gaining ground, but not falling away either. Just there, walking, keeping the same distance. And that's when the panic started to change. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was confusion. Because something about that was wrong in a way I couldn't explain. I pressed my foot down harder on the accelerator. The car surged forward, engine louder now, tires humming over the uneven tarmac. The lane curved slightly, then straightened, then dipped again between thicker clusters of trees. My headlights cut through it all in that narrow tunnel of light, everything outside it completely black. I didn't want to look in the mirror again, but I did. And this time, there was nothing there, just empty road. I blinked hard, leaning forward slightly, trying to make sense of it. Gone, completely gone. No shape, no movement, nothing at all. Relief hit me so quickly it almost made me laugh. Right, I breathed, a shaky sound. Right, that's okay, that's fine. I swallowed, trying to steady myself, trying to reset. You imagined it. You're overtired. That's all it is. I clung to that explanation because I needed it to be true. But then, something ahead caught my eye. A faint reflection in the distance. Low to the ground, not moving. At first, I thought it was just the road bending again, the headlights catching something metallic on the verge. But as I got closer, the shape became clearer. It was a car, parked across the lane, not on the side, not pulled in, across it. My stomach dropped instantly. I slowed without thinking, my foot easing off the accelerator as the headlights washed over it properly. It was the same silver estate I'd passed earlier. I knew it straight away. Same shape, same dull shine of wet metal, same slightly open rear door. Except now, it was positioned sideways, blocking the entire road. I felt that sharp spike of fear again, worse than before. Okay, I whispered, my voice tight. Okay, that's not... I didn't finish the sentence, because there was someone standing in front of it, a man, facing me, waving his arms, not wildly, not frantically, just enough to get my attention, like he expected me to stop. Every instinct in me screamed at once. Don't. I slowed anyway. I didn't mean to. It was automatic. You see someone in the road, you slow down. You prepare to stop. You assess. That's what we're taught. That's what makes it so easy. The man took a few steps toward me, still waving one arm, the other hanging by his side. As my headlights hit him properly, I could see more detail. Mid-40s maybe. Dark coat, hair flattened by the damp. His face, that was what made something inside me twist. He didn't look panicked. He didn't look hurt. He didn't even look particularly urgent. He just looked intent, focused, watching me in a way that felt far too direct, like I was already part of something he decided. I slowed further. The car crept forward, 10 meters away, 8, 6. The man stepped closer again. Then, something moved in my mirror, a shape, close, much closer than it should have been. My breath caught in my throat as I flicked my eyes up and saw it. Another vehicle, behind me. No headlights, just the outline of it emerging from the darkness, blocking the lane, trapping me. The realization hit all at once. Not a breakdown, not someone needing help, a setup. My chest tightened so sharply it hurt. No, I breathed, shaking my head slightly. No. The man in front of me stopped walking, lowered his arm, and just stood there, watching, waiting. Like he knew exactly what I'd just realized. I didn't think. I reacted. My foot slammed down on the accelerator. The engine roared, louder than it had all night, and the car surged forward. The man didn't move, not properly. He stepped slightly to the side, but not enough, not quickly enough. For a split second, I thought I was going to hit him, that I was going to feel that impact through the bonnet, that sickening, irreversible moment. But somehow I didn't. I swerved just enough, tires skidding slightly on the damp road, the car jolting as I forced it past the nose of the estate. I heard something scrape along the side, metal on metal, sharp and loud. But I didn't stop to check what. I didn't stop at all. I just drove. Fast, faster than I should have on a lane like that. My hands were shaking so badly on the wheel I could barely keep it straight. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was in my throat, my ears, everywhere at once. I glanced in the mirror once, just once, and what I saw made everything worse. The man was standing in the road behind me now, not chasing, not shouting, just standing there. And behind him, the vehicle that had blocked the road was still there, still dark, still silent. And for a brief second, as my headlights caught the angle just right, I saw someone else step out of it, a second figure. Then the road curved, and they were gone, completely gone, swallowed by the dark again. I didn't slow down after that. I couldn't. Every part of me was screaming to get as far away as possible, as quickly as possible. But even as I drove, even as the lane stretched ahead and the darkness shifted and changed, one thought kept repeating in my mind, over and over, clearer each time. That hadn't been random. That hadn't been someone breaking down. That hadn't been bad luck. That had been planned. And the worst part, the part I couldn't stop thinking about, was how easily I'd almost fallen into it. I didn't stop driving until the road changed. Not gradually, properly changed. The kind of change you feel more than see at first. The surface smoothing out under the tires, the hedges lowering just enough to let in a wider stretch of sky. Then finally, mercifully, a proper road sign appeared ahead, reflective and clean, catching my headlights in a way that felt almost surreal after everything behind me. A roundabout, an actual roundabout. I nearly cried when I saw it. I slowed hard, not trusting myself to take it too fast, and rolled onto it like someone who hadn't quite remembered how normal roads worked. There were proper lane markings, direction arrows, a sign pointing toward a town I recognized, Ripon, still miles off, but real, familiar, connected. I took the exit without even thinking, just wanting distance. Distance from the lane, distance from that car, distance from those men. Only once I was properly back on a wider road did I realize how badly I was shaking. My hands were still locked around the wheel, fingers stiff, knuckles pale. My shoulders ached from how tense I'd been holding them. My breathing was shallow, uneven, like I'd been running instead of sitting in a car. I pulled into the first lay-by I saw, not tucked away, not hidden, open, visible from the road, the kind of place where another car could pull in at any moment. I left the engine running and just sat there for a second, staring ahead, trying to slow everything down. Okay, I said quietly. Okay, you're out. But it didn't feel like I was, not fully. Because once the immediate panic started to settle even slightly, My mind went straight back to what had just happened, and the more I replayed it, the worse it became. At first, I tried to explain it away. That's what you do, isn't it? You reach for something logical, something manageable. Maybe it really was just a breakdown. Maybe the man had been trying to get help. Maybe the car behind had pulled up at the wrong moment. But even as I thought it, I knew it didn't fit. None of it did. The way the estate had been positioned, sideways, blocking the lane completely. The way the man hadn't looked panicked. The second vehicle appearing behind me with no headlights. The fact that no one shouted, no one chased. They hadn't needed to. That's what made it feel so wrong. It hadn't been chaotic. It had been controlled. I dragged a hand over my face, pressing my fingers into my eyes for a second, trying to steady myself. My thoughts felt slippery, like I couldn't quite hold on to one long enough to make sense of it. Then something else surfaced. A detail I hadn't paid enough attention to at the time. The man at the gateway. "What is it you think you saw?" I went still. I hadn't told him anything. Not really. I'd barely spoken. And yet he'd asked that. Not "Are you lost?" Not "Do you need help?" That specific, targeted, as if he already knew there was something to see. My chest tightened again, a slower, colder kind of fear settling in now. Because that meant the figure in the trees. That hadn't been separate. That hadn't been random. I let out a slow breath, staring down at the dashboard. "No," I murmured. "No, that's..." But I couldn't finish the thought, because once it started forming, it didn't stop. The suitcase at the bus stop, the estate car with the door slightly open, the man in the road who didn't look hurt, the second car with no lights, the way they hadn't rushed, hadn't panicked, hadn't even seemed particularly bothered when I drove straight through. It all lined up in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. They hadn't been reacting. They'd been waiting. And not just for anyone. For someone like me. Alone. Tired. Off route. Easy to slow down. I felt something shift inside me then. Not panic. Not exactly. Recognition. And it made everything worse. Because now I couldn't unsee it. Every moment from earlier replayed itself. But different now. Sharper. Clearer. I thought back to the silver estate the first time I passed it. The rear door slightly open. At the time, it had just seemed strange. Now, it looked like an invitation or bait. I remembered how I'd slowed slightly when I saw it, how I'd looked, how I'd considered stopping. If I'd pulled over then, got out, walked toward that car, I felt my stomach twist sharply, and I had to look away, focusing on the empty road ahead of me instead. "No," I said again, firmer this time. "You didn't. You kept going." But that didn't feel like enough, because even though I hadn't stopped there, I had stopped later, at the gateway, right where I shouldn't have, right where that figure had been. A chill ran through me as the realization settled deeper. That spot hadn't been random either. It had been just far enough off the main road, just isolated enough, just dark enough. And I had pulled into it myself. I wrapped my arms around myself for a second, suddenly cold despite the heater still running. "They didn't make you stop," I whispered. "You did that." And somehow that was worse, because it meant they didn't need to force anything. They just needed to create the right conditions. And wait, I reached for my phone again, even though I already knew what I'd see. No signal. Still nothing. I let it drop back into my lap and looked up at the road. A car passed in the distance, the first one I'd seen in what felt like hours. Just headlights at first, then the shape of it, then gone again. Normal. Completely normal. But even that didn't comfort me the way it should have. Because now I couldn't stop thinking about how close I'd come, and how easily it could have gone differently. I stayed there in that lay-by for a few more minutes, trying to steady myself enough to drive again. Every sound made me tense, the wind brushing past the car, the faint creak of metal as it cooled, even the distant hum of another vehicle miles away. When I finally pulled back onto the road, I kept checking my mirrors, constantly, more than I ever had before. Expecting? No, not expecting. Dreading that I might see headlights appear behind me again, or worse, no headlights at all. But the road stayed empty, and that, in a strange way, didn't make me feel any better. Because as I drove on, one thought kept repeating in the back of my mind, quiet, steady, impossible to shake, that I hadn't escaped something random. I'd slipped out of something that worked, something practiced, something that had probably happened before again. Just not tonight, or at least not to me. I didn't tell anyone the full story straight away. That's probably the first thing I need to admit, because it says a lot about how it all settled in afterwards. When I finally reached my aunt's cottage just after 2 in the morning, exhausted, wired, still shaking, I gave them a version of it, a safer one. I said I'd taken a wrong turn, ended up on a bad road, got spooked by a broken down car and someone acting strangely, and drove off. That was it. No mention of the second vehicle. No mention of the man at the gateway. No mention of how deliberate it all felt, because saying it out loud made it real in a way I wasn't ready for. My cousin Oliver was still up when I arrived. He opened the door looking half asleep, wrapped in a hoodie, and the first thing he said was, "Bloody hell, you look awful. You all right?" And I remember forcing a laugh. Actually forcing it. "Just tired," I said. "Drive was worse than I thought." He nodded like that made sense, like that was enough. And for a few hours, I let it be enough. I didn't sleep. I tried. I lay in the spare room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet of the countryside, different from the road, but still heavy in its own way. Every little sound felt amplified. The creak of the house settling, wind brushing against the windows. At one point, I was sure I heard tires on gravel outside, and I sat bolt upright in bed, heart hammering, before realizing it was just the boiler kicking in. I kept replaying it, over and over, but not in the same way as before. Now it was slower, more detailed. And every time I went through it, something new stood out, something I hadn't noticed properly in the moment. By morning, the fear had changed shape. It wasn't sharp anymore. It was settled, colder, harder to explain. I sat in the kitchen with a mug of tea I wasn't drinking, staring out at the back garden, while Oliver moved around behind me, making toast, chatting about hospital visiting hours like everything was normal. And I realized something that made my chest tighten again. I couldn't place when it had actually started. Not the panic, the realization. There wasn't a single moment I could point to and say, that's when I knew something was wrong. It had built, piece by piece, and that meant it hadn't been obvious by design. I turned slightly in my chair, watching Oliver for a second before speaking. "Can I ask you something?" "Yeah," he said, not really looking up. "Do you ever hear about things happening on the roads around here, late at night?" He paused, just briefly. Not long enough for it to seem strange on its own, but enough. "What sort of things?" he asked. I hesitated. I could have said it plainly, could have told him everything, but instead I found myself softening it again. Just people acting odd, cars pulled over where they shouldn't be, that sort of thing. He shrugged slightly, turning back to the counter. "I mean, it's the countryside, isn't it? You get weird stuff sometimes, people messing about. Bit of drink, bit of boredom, casual, dismissive, normal. But something about the way he'd answered didn't quite sit right, not what he said. How quickly he moved on from it. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I suppose," and that should have been the end of it. But it wasn't, because later that afternoon, after we'd been to see my aunt and come back, Oliver mentioned something without really meaning to. We were in the car, heading back along one of the main roads, the kind I should have stayed on the night before, and he pointed off to the left as we passed the junction. "That lane there," he said casually. "You don't want to take that one at night." My stomach dropped instantly. I turned my head, trying to catch a glimpse of it as we passed. Just a narrow turning between hedges, unremarkable, completely ordinary. "Why not?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. He shrugged again. "Dunno, just heard stuff, people getting lost down there, cars turning up abandoned, nothing official like, but..." He paused, glancing at me briefly. "You know how it is." I didn't answer straight away, because I did know, or at least I was starting to. That evening, I went back out to my car. I hadn't really looked at it properly since arriving. I'd been too tired, too focused on getting inside, on putting distance between myself and everything that had happened. But now I needed to check. I unlocked it slowly, the sound of the click louder than it should have been in the quiet. Nothing looked out of place at first. No obvious damage, no broken windows, no signs that anyone had tried to get in. But when I opened the driver's door and sat down, something felt off, subtle, not visible. Just that same instinctive shift I'd felt on the road, like the space wasn't entirely mine anymore. I shook my head slightly, annoyed at myself. "Stop," I muttered. "You're overthinking it." I reached down to adjust the seat, pushing it forward slightly, and that's when I saw it. Something tucked low, near the rail beneath the passenger seat, a small piece of folded paper. I froze. For a second, I didn't move at all, just stared at it, trying to think, trying to remember. Had I dropped something? Had it been there before? But I knew it hadn't, because I'm not the sort of person who leaves things lying around in my car like that, especially not something so neatly folded. Slowly, I leaned across and picked it up. It was damp at the edges, like it had been outside at some point. I unfolded it carefully. It wasn't anything official, not a receipt, not a ticket, just a torn piece of paper. And on it, written in pen, was a time and a number plate. My breath caught. I read it again, then again. The plate wasn't mine. I knew that straight away, but I recognized it anyway, because I'd seen it earlier, on the Silver Estate, the one at the side of the road, the one that had been turned sideways across the lane, the one I'd almost stopped for. My hands started shaking again, slower this time, colder, because that meant someone had been close enough to my car, after I'd already passed them, after I'd driven on, after I thought I was clear. I looked up sharply, scanning the empty drive, the quiet lane beyond the gate. Nothing, no one, just stillness, but it didn't feel empty anymore. Not really. I didn't sleep that night either, and the night after that, before I finally drove home in daylight, I stood at the window of the spare room, looking out over the narrow lane that ran past the cottage. Everything was quiet, peaceful, the kind of place people move to for calm. But just before I turned away, I saw something. A car, parked further down the lane than it should have been. No headlights, no interior light, just sitting there. For a moment I thought it might have been someone visiting a neighbor, but then it moved, slowly, without ever turning its lights on, and drove away. I stayed at the window for a long time after that, long enough for the dark to settle back into itself, long enough to realize something I still haven't been able to shake. People think the danger on roads like that is obvious, that you'll know it when you see it, that it'll look like a threat, feel like one, give you a clear chance to react. But that's not how it works. Not really. The worst part isn't the moment when you're trapped, it's everything before it. The small decisions, the missed turning, the place you choose to stop, the thing you almost ignore. Because by the time it feels wrong, you're already exactly where they need you to be. And if you're on your own, if you're tired, if you hesitate for even a second, you might not get the chance I did. So if you take anything from this, anything at all, it's this. If a road feels wrong, don't convince yourself it isn't. Don't wait, don't check, just leave. Because whatever's out there, it doesn't need to chase you. It just needs you to stop. I didn't drive back to Bristol the same way. That was the first decision I made before I even left the cottage. I stood in the kitchen with my phone plugged into the wall, signal finally strong enough to load properly, staring at the route options like one of them might reveal something hidden if I looked long enough. The fastest way back would have taken me close to that same stretch of road again. Not the exact lane, but near enough that the thought of it made my stomach turn. So I chose the longer route, motorways where possible, bigger roads, places with traffic, cameras, lights. It added nearly an hour onto the journey, but I didn't care. I told Oliver I just wanted an easier drive back, less messing about with country lanes. He didn't question it. No one did. And for the first couple of hours, it actually felt fine, normal. Daylight helped. That was the biggest thing. Everything looked smaller, less threatening, almost ridiculous compared to how it had felt at night. The hedges weren't towering walls anymore. The fields were just fields. Even the idea of that narrow lane seemed distant, like something exaggerated by darkness and exhaustion. I almost convinced myself that was all it had been. Almost. By the time I joined the A1 heading south, the sky had clouded over again, that flat gray you get where everything feels a bit muted, but not quite stormy. Traffic picked up slightly, lorries, a few cars overtaking, nothing unusual. I settled into the middle lane, trying to let the rhythm of it steady me. Radio on. Window cracked open again. Coffee from a service station balancing dangerously in the cup holder. It felt manageable. Not safe exactly, but far enough removed. And for a while, I stopped checking my mirrors so much. Stopped replaying everything. Stopped thinking about that piece of paper in my glove compartment. But then, I noticed the car. It wasn't anything dramatic at first, just another vehicle in the distance behind me, dark colored, maybe navy or black. Hard to tell properly under the dull light. It sat 2 lanes over at first, moving at a steady pace. Nothing unusual about it. I wouldn't have thought twice about it. Except, every time I changed lanes, it did too. Not immediately, not in a way that would have been obvious to anyone else, but consistently enough that after a few minutes, I couldn't ignore it. I tested it. That's the part I wish I hadn't done, because it meant I was already thinking the worst. I slowed slightly, letting a lorry pass me, then moved back into the left lane. A few seconds later, the car behind shifted lanes as well, still keeping distance, still not doing anything over, but not leaving. I felt that familiar tightening in my chest again. "Don't start," I muttered, gripping the wheel a bit tighter. "It's a motorway. People change lanes." That was reasonable. That was normal. I tried to leave it at that, but then I sped up. Not dramatically, just enough to put a bit more space between me and everything else. The car stayed behind. Same distance, same pace, like it had adjusted to match me. I checked the mirrors properly then, trying to get a better look. The windows were tinted, too dark to see inside clearly. All I could make out was the shape of the driver, just a shadow against the steering wheel. I swallowed, forcing myself to look back at the road ahead. "Coincidence," I said quietly. "Just coincidence." But my body didn't believe it. I could feel it in the way my shoulders tensed again, the way my hands started to sweat slightly against the wheel, the way my eyes kept flicking back to the mirror even when I told myself not to. And then, the headlights flashed, once, brief, sharp. I froze for a second, my mind scrambling for a logical explanation. Someone warning me about something ahead, a speed camera, a hazard. That happens all the time. But then, they flashed again and again. Not a quick double flash, not a warning, a pattern, slow, deliberate, persistent, directed at me. I felt my stomach drop. "No," I whispered. I checked around me. Other cars on the road now. Not many, but enough that it shouldn't have felt like I was being singled out. But the flashes didn't stop. They kept coming, steady, controlled, impossible to ignore. And worse, no one else reacted. The lorry ahead didn't brake. The car in the next lane didn't shift. No one else seemed to notice. It was just me and them. I pressed my foot down slightly, increasing my speed again. The engine responded smoothly, the car pulling forward, and the flashing stopped. Just like that. Gone. The headlights returned to normal, white, still, following. I stared at the mirror for a moment longer than I should have, trying to make sense of it, trying to decide if I was overreacting again. But deep down, I knew that wasn't random. It wasn't someone being impatient. It wasn't someone trying to pass. It was communication. I just didn't know what it meant or who it was for. I swallowed hard, forcing my eyes back to the road. "Right?" I said under my breath. "You're not stopping. Not this time." That decision came easily, too easily, because now I understood something I hadn't fully accepted the night before. Stopping. That was the mistake. That was the moment everything shifted, and I wasn't going to give anyone that again. Up ahead, a sign appeared for services, 2 miles. I stared at it for a second, my mind immediately splitting in two. One part of me wanted it, bright lights, people, cameras, safety. The other part, the part that remembered, felt something colder because I thought the same thing before and it hadn't helped. I tightened my grip on the wheel. "Keep going," I murmured, but my eyes stayed on the sign as it drew closer, and in the mirror, the car stayed exactly where it was, still, silent, waiting, like it already knew I might not be able to resist stopping again. I told myself I wasn't going to pull in. I said it out loud this time, like that would make it stick. "You're not stopping," I muttered, keeping my eyes fixed on the road ahead, the sign for the services getting closer, the familiar blue icon glowing faintly against the gray sky. And for a moment, I didn't. I stayed in the lane, past the first warning sign, then the second. The exit slip road appeared ahead on the left, curving away gently beneath the motorway. I kept going straight, heart thudding, telling myself I'd made the right call. But then I glanced at the fuel gauge, just for a second, and my stomach tightened. It wasn't empty, not even close, but it was lower than I'd realized. Low enough that the thought crept in immediately. What if you need it later? What if you end up somewhere like last night again? That was all it took. Doubt. That small, reasonable doubt that sounds like common sense. I hesitated, just a fraction too long. Then, without fully committing to it in my head, I flicked the indicator on and eased into the exit lane. The moment I did, my chest tightened, like something in me had just made a mistake I couldn't undo. "Just quick," I said under my breath. "In and out, that's it." The slip road curved down and away from the motorway, dipping under it in a long, spiraling bend. Almost immediately, the noise of the traffic above dulled, then faded entirely. It was strange how fast it disappeared, like someone had closed a door behind me. By the time I reached the bottom, it was quiet, too quiet. The services came into view ahead, and something about it felt wrong straight away. It wasn't abandoned, but it wasn't active either. The building itself looked open, lights on inside, vending machines glowing through the windows, but the forecourt was almost completely empty. A few scattered cars parked far apart from each other, no one walking between them, no one at the pumps, no movement. I slowed as I pulled in, scanning automatically, my eyes moving from one corner of the space to another. No staff visible, no one coming or going, just stillness. I parked near the front of the building, deliberately choosing a spot where I could see the entrance clearly. The engine idled for a second before I switched it off, and the silence that followed felt heavier than it should have. I didn't get out straight away. Instead, I checked the mirror. The motorway exit behind me curved out of sight, but nothing. No car following down, no dark saloon pulling in behind me. I waited. 10 seconds, 20, still nothing. A small breath escaped me before I could stop it. "Okay," I murmured. "You're fine." I sat there a few seconds longer, just to be sure. Still nothing. No movement anywhere in the car park. Finally, I reached for the door handle. "Quick," I said, "just fuel and go." The cold air hit me the moment I stepped out. Not sharp, not biting, just that flat, damp chill that seeps in quickly and makes everything feel quieter than it should. The kind of air that carries sound differently, like it dulls it. I locked the car out of habit, the click echoing faintly in the open space, and walked toward the building. My footsteps sounded too loud. That was the first thing I noticed. Each step seemed to carry further than it should have, bouncing off the empty forecourt and the walls of the building. I slowed slightly without meaning to, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt. I glanced around again. Still no one, not even inside. The lights were on, but through the glass I could only see the vending machines and the tiled floor beyond them. No staff behind the counter, no customers, nothing. A flicker of unease passed through me, but I kept moving, because stopping in the open felt worse. Inside it was warmer, but somehow that didn't help. The hum of the machines filled the space, low and constant. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, casting everything in that flat, artificial brightness that makes shadows look sharper rather than softer. I walked toward the vending machines, more out of habit than anything else. Something to do, something normal. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, pale, tired, eyes slightly too wide. I didn't like the way I looked. I didn't like the way I felt. "Get a grip," I whispered under my breath. I reached for my phone, checking the signal again. Still weak, one bar, flickering. I considered calling someone anyway, just to hear a voice. But before I could decide, something made me turn. A feeling, not a sound. Just that sudden awareness you get when something changes behind you. I looked toward the door and saw her, parked outside, right next to mine. My heart dropped instantly. I hadn't heard it arrive, hadn't seen it pull in. It was just there, dark, still, close enough that if I stepped out, I'd be walking straight past it. I felt my stomach tighten, a cold, sinking sensation spreading through me. "That's not," I started quietly, then stopped, because I already knew. It had to be the same one. It had to be. The angle, the color, the way it was positioned, too close, too deliberate in an otherwise empty space. I took a slow step back from the window, my pulse starting to climb again. "You didn't see it come in," I whispered. "You didn't." My voice faltered, because there was only one explanation for that. It had followed me down. It had just done it quietly. I stared at it through the glass. The windows were tinted, darker than before in the daylight. The headlights were off now, but I could still feel something. Presence. Someone inside. Watching. Waiting. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "Okay," I said under my breath, forcing my voice to stay steady. "You're not trapped. You're not just walk out. Get in the car. Leave. Simple. That was all it was. Simple. I moved toward the door, slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. As I reached the handle, I hesitated. Just for a second, my reflection in the glass looked back at me again, and this time, I barely recognized it. Then I pushed the door open. The cold air hit me again, sharper now, and I stepped outside, straight into the space between my car and theirs. I didn't look at their car straight away. I couldn't. Every instinct in me was screaming to keep my eyes forward, to act normal, to pretend I hadn't noticed anything at all. Like if I didn't acknowledge it, it wouldn't fully exist. So I walked, slow, measured, trying not to rush, even though everything inside me was telling me to run. The space between the two cars felt far too narrow, closer than I would have ever parked next to someone if I'd had a choice. As I stepped into it, I became painfully aware of every small sound, my shoes against the tarmac, the faint rustle of my coat, the distant hum of the building behind me. But from their car, nothing. No movement, no door opening, no voice, just stillness. I reached my door. My hand hovered over the handle for half a second. Then I glanced sideways. I wish I hadn't. The window was tinted, darker up close, reflecting just enough of the gray sky that it masked the interior almost completely. But not entirely. Behind that thin layer of reflection, I saw shape, a silhouette, someone sitting in the driver's seat, perfectly still, facing forward, not even turning toward me. And somehow, that was worse, because it meant they knew I was there. They just didn't need to react. My chest tightened so sharply it almost hurt. I grabbed the handle, pulled the door open, and got inside as quickly as I could without making it obvious I was rushing. The moment I was in, I locked the doors, the click loud in the confined space. For a second, I just sat there, breathing, listening, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. The car next to me remained completely still. I swallowed hard, forcing my hands to move. "Just start it," I whispered. "Just start it and go." I slid the key into the ignition and turned it. Nothing. No sound, no click, no attempt, just silence. I frowned slightly, my brain not catching up straight away. I turned it again. Still nothing. The same dead, empty response. My stomach dropped. "No," I breathed. I tried again, harder this time, as if force would somehow make a difference. Nothing. Not even a flicker on the dashboard. That was the moment everything changed. Because up until then, there had still been room for doubt, for coincidence, for rational explanations. But this wasn't that. This was deliberate. My hands started to shake properly now, not just nerves, but something deeper, colder. I stared at the ignition for a second, my mind racing, trying to catch up, trying to process what I was actually dealing with. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay, think. Battery?" But it had been fine minutes ago, completely fine. There hadn't been any warning, no hesitation when I parked, no flicker of the lights, nothing. And yet now, dead. Completely dead. My breathing quickened. I forced myself to look up, slowly, carefully, toward the window. The car next to me hadn't moved. Still there, still silent, still waiting. And then it started to move. Not forward, not away, backwards, slowly, deliberately, reversing just enough to reposition itself. My pulse spiked instantly. "What are you?" The words caught in my throat as the car angled slightly, then rolled forward again, directly behind mine, close, too close, blocking me in. I felt the air leave my lungs in a sharp, shallow breath. No, this wasn't subtle anymore. This wasn't coincidence. This was control. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands, my fingers fumbling slightly as I unlocked it. One bar of signal, barely, but enough. I hit the emergency call option without thinking. The ringing felt too loud in my ear, too slow, every second stretching painful as I stared at the mirror, watching the car behind me. It had stopped moving now, positioned perfectly. There was no way out. The call connected. Emergency. Which service? Police, I said immediately, my voice shaking despite how hard I tried to steady it. I need help. I'm at a service station off the A1, I think, and there's someone here. My car won't start, and they've blocked me in. The words tumbled over each other, messy, rushed. "Okay, slow down," the operator said, her tone shifting slightly, more focused now. "Can you confirm your location?" "I don't know exactly," I said, glancing around desperately, trying to find anything identifying. It's one of those underpass ones. The road curves down and there's no one else here. I can't see anyone." "All right," she said quickly. "Stay in your vehicle. Keep the doors locked. We're getting someone to you." I nodded instinctively. even though she couldn't see me. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay." My grip tightened on the phone, and then I heard it, a door opening, close, very close. My heart slammed against my ribs. I didn't want to look. Every part of me resisted it. But I couldn't help myself. I turned my head slowly and saw him, the man stepping out of the car behind me, tall, broad, wearing a dark brown jacket zipped up to his chin. He didn't rush, didn't hesitate, just closed the door behind him with a soft, controlled movement and started walking toward my car. My breathing hitched. "Someone's getting out," I whispered into the phone. He's coming over." "Stay calm," the operator said quickly. "Stay on the line. Do not open the door." "I won't," I said, my voice barely above a breath. I watched him through the side mirror as he approached, step by step, unhurried, like he had all the time in the world. He reached the driver's side window and stopped for a moment. He just stood there, looking in, not knocking, not speaking, just watching. And in that silence, in that stillness, the fear shifted again, because I realized something that made everything worse. He wasn't trying to get in. Not yet. He was waiting for me. And to do something first, I didn't move. Not properly. I don't even think I blinked for a few seconds. I just sat there, frozen, staring straight ahead, aware of him standing inches away on the other side of the glass. You don't realize how thin a car window feels until someone is standing right there looking in. It's nothing. A barrier that exists more in your head than in reality. I could feel his presence before I properly looked at him. That's the only way I can explain it. Like the air had changed. He didn't knock, didn't speak, didn't try the handle. He just stood there, and I could feel him watching me. "Stay calm," the operator's voice said in my ear, low and steady. "Officers are on their way. Stay with me." I swallowed, my throat dry. "He's just standing here," I whispered. "He's not saying anything." "Okay, that's all right. Just keep your doors locked." I nodded again, even though she couldn't see me. My hands were shaking so badly now I had to grip the phone tighter just to stop it slipping. Slowly, I turned my head, just enough, and looked at him. Up close, he looked normal. That was the worst part. Mid-30s, maybe. Clean-shaven, short hair damp at the edges. His jacket looked like something you'd see on anyone walking through town in winter. Nothing about him screamed danger. Except his eyes. They weren't aggressive, not angry, not even particularly intense. They were just focused, like he was studying me, taking something in, measuring. And the longer he stood there without saying anything, the more that feeling grew, that this wasn't random, that he wasn't deciding what to do. He already knew. I forced myself to look away first, my heart pounding in my chest. "He's just looking at me," I whispered into the phone. He's not doing anything." "That's okay," the operator replied quickly. "Stay where you are. Help is coming." Help, the word felt distant, abstract, because right now it was just me and him, in this car that suddenly felt far too small. A few seconds passed, maybe more. Time didn't feel right anymore. Then he moved, not toward the door, not toward the handle. He stepped back, just one step. And then he walked around the front of my car, slowly. I turned my head slightly, tracking him through the windscreen as he passed. His movements were deliberate, measured, like he was following a pattern. He stopped briefly in front of the bonnet, looking down at it, then kept going, around to the passenger side, out of my direct line of sight. My breathing quickened. "I can't see him," I whispered. "He's gone round the other side." "Stay calm," the operator repeated. "Stay with me." I twisted slightly in my seat, trying to catch a glimpse through the passenger window. And there he was, standing just outside, looking in again. Not at me this time, at the inside of the car, the seats, the footwell, the back, checking. The realization hit slowly, cold, heavy. He's looking inside," I said, my voice shaking, like he's checking if anyone else is here. The operator didn't respond straight away, just a brief pause. Then more firmly, "Okay, stay where you are. Officers are close." Close. I clung to that word, because everything else felt like it was slipping. The man moved again, back around the front, then to my side, then around again. A slow circle, then another, each time pausing slightly. Looking in, observing, not rushing, not speaking, just waiting. It went on longer than it should have, long enough for the fear to shift again. Not panic this time, something worse, something quieter. Because after the first minute, after the initial shock wore off, I started to realize something. He wasn't trying to break in, not yet. And that meant this wasn't the end of it. This was just part of it. I gripped the steering wheel with my free hand, my fingers tightening. Why isn't he doing anything? I whispered. Why is he just walking around? The question hung in the air. The operator didn't answer it because there wasn't a reassuring answer. And deep down, I think I already knew because I'd seen this before. Not exactly like this, but enough. The lane, the car, the man in the road, the second vehicle behind me, the way they positioned everything, the way they hadn't rushed, hadn't panicked, hadn't reacted when I escaped. It had all been measured, controlled, and now, so was this. Another slow pass around the car, another pause at the window, his face closer this time, closer than before. And for a split second, our eyes met again, and something changed, not in his expression, that stayed exactly the same, but in mine. Because I realized he wasn't unsure, he wasn't deciding, he was waiting for something specific, something from me, a mistake, a reaction, a moment. My grip tightened on the phone. I'm not opening the door, I said quickly, almost to myself. I'm not. Good, the operator said immediately. Do not engage with him. I won't, I was mental. I knew better now. I wasn't going to fall for it again. Not this time. Another slow circle, another pause. Then he stopped, right by my window, closer than before, leaning slightly toward the glass, and for the first time he spoke. His voice was low, calm, almost conversational. You all right in there? I felt a sharp jolt of fear run through me. The question sounded normal, concerned, exactly what it should have been, and that made it worse. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Car trouble? He added, tilting his head slightly. I shook my head quickly, instinctively, even though I knew he could see the fear written all over my face. I've called someone, I said, my voice unsteady. They're on their way. He watched me for a moment. Then his eyes shifted slightly. Not to me, to my phone, to the fact that I was still on the line, and something in his expression, barely noticeable, changed. Just slightly. Enough for me to see it, enough for me to understand. He straightened, stepped back, and without another word, turned, walked back to his car. My breath caught as I watched him through the mirror. He opened the door, got in, sat there for a second. Then, the engine started. The car reversed slowly, pulled out and drove toward the exit. No rush, no panic, just leaving. Like this had all been interrupted. I stared after it, my heart still racing, my body still locked in place. He's going, I whispered into the phone. He's leaving. Okay, the operator said, relief creeping into her voice. Stay where you are. Officers will be with you shortly. I nodded again, my breathing finally starting to slow. But even as the car disappeared up the ramp, one thought settled heavily in my mind. He hadn't failed. He hadn't been scared off. He had just stopped because something had changed. And whatever that something was, I had a horrible feeling it wasn't over. I stayed exactly where I was. I didn't move the car, didn't touch the ignition again, didn't even adjust my seat. I just sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, staring at the empty space where his car had been. It felt wrong that it was gone, not relieving, wrong, like something had been left unfinished. You're doing well, the operator said, her voice steadier now. Officers are almost there. Just stay with me. I nodded slowly, though my eyes were still fixed on the exit ramp. I didn't do anything, I said quietly, more to myself than to her. I didn't even, he just left. That's okay, she replied. You did the right thing. You stayed inside, you didn't engage. No, I interrupted softly. That's not why. There was a pause on the line. Sorry, she said. I swallowed, because I didn't know how to explain it. Not properly. He didn't leave because I didn't open the door, I said slowly. He left because something changed. Another pause. Then carefully, what do you mean by that? I looked down at my phone, at the call still connected, at the signal icon flickering weakly in the corner. I think it's because of this, I said. This time, the operator didn't respond straight away. And that silence, that was what made it worse. Because it didn't feel like confusion, it felt like recognition. A few seconds later, she spoke again, but her tone had shifted slightly, more measured. Stay where you are, she said again. Officers will be there any moment. Any moment. That phrase stayed in my head, because I realized he'd left just before they arrived. Not after, not when they pulled in, before, like he'd known how much time he had. I tightened my grip on the phone. How long have you been tracking this? I asked suddenly. The question slipped out before I could stop it. Tracking what? She replied, careful again. This, I said, gesturing uselessly around me, even though she couldn't see. People getting followed, cars not starting, people waiting. I stopped myself, because even saying it out loud felt ridiculous. Like I was trying to build something out of fragments that didn't fully connect. But deep down, they did. I exhaled slowly. It doesn't feel random. There was a longer pause this time. Then, officers are arriving now, she said. And just like that, the conversation ended. Not abruptly, but deliberately. Like that part of it wasn't meant to continue. I saw the blue lights before I heard the siren, flashing at the top of the ramp, spilling faintly into the lower level of the services like a distant pulse. Relief hit me instantly, but it was thinner than I expected. Not the overwhelming sense of safety I'd imagined, just less fear. Not the absence of it. The patrol car came down slowly, tires crunching lightly as it pulled into the forecourt. It stopped a few spaces away from me. Engine idling, lights still flashing. A second vehicle followed not long after, pulling in behind the first. 2 officers stepped out, both of them scanning the area first before approaching my car. That detail stuck with me. The way they looked around, not casually, not like they were just checking for traffic, like they were expecting something. I unlocked the door as they got closer, my hand still unsteady. You all right? One of them asked as I stepped out. He was older, maybe late 40s, calm but alert. His eyes moved past me briefly, scanning the space behind my car before settling back on me. Yeah, I said, though my voice didn't quite match the word. I think so. You called it in? The younger one asked. I nodded. My car won't start, and someone was here. He followed me, blocked me in. The 2 officers exchanged a quick glance, subtle, but not subtle enough. All right, the older one said, stepping past me slightly toward the back of my car. Let's have a look. I stayed where I was, watching as he moved around to the bonnet, popping it open with a practiced motion. The younger officer lingered nearby, his attention still shifting between me and the empty exit ramp. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then, yeah, the older officer muttered, not surprised, not confused, just confirming. What? I asked, my chest tightening again. He looked up at me briefly. Battery line's been cut, he said. Just like that, matter of fact. Like it wasn't unusual, like he'd seen it before. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Cut? I repeated. He nodded, closing the bonnet again. Clean job. Would have taken a few seconds. A few seconds. That was all. I thought back to when I'd been inside, when I'd stood at the vending machines, when I'd been looking at my reflection instead of the car park. Someone could have been right here, next to my car. Close enough to touch it. Close enough to do that. And I wouldn't have known. I wrapped my arms around myself instinctively. I didn't hear anything, I said quietly. The younger officer gave a small, humorless breath. Wouldn't have, he said. Happens quicker than you'd think. I looked between them. You've seen this before. It wasn't a question. Another glance passed between them, this time slightly longer. The older one straightened, brushing his hands together lightly. We've had a few reports, he said. Careful again, measured. The same tone the operator had used. What kind of reports? I pressed. Drivers getting stopped, he said. Stranded vehicles, suspicious activity. That's more than suspicious, I said, my voice tightening. They blocked me in. There were 2 of them last night, and the night before. I stopped, because I realized how it sounded. But he didn't dismiss it, didn't interrupt. He just listened, which somehow made it worse. Did you get a look at the vehicle? The younger officer asked. Dark saloon, I said quickly. Tinted windows. No headlights when it was behind me before. It followed me for miles. He nodded slightly, like that matched something in his head. Registration? He asked. I hesitated. No, I admitted. I couldn't see it properly. That wasn't entirely true. I'd seen one, just not that one. The silver estate, the paper, the number written down. But for some reason, I didn't mention it. Not yet. The older officer glanced back toward the exit again. He didn't hang around? He asked. I shook my head. No, he left just before you got here. Another small nod. No surprise, no urgency, just acknowledgement, like that part of it had gone exactly as expected. I felt that cold feeling deepen. You think he knew? I asked quietly. The older officer met my eyes for a moment, then looked away. We'll take a statement, he said, and we'll get your vehicle sorted. Not an answer. Not really, just a step forward, a process. But as I stood there, watching them move around my car, hearing the quiet crackle of the police radio, seeing the empty ramp where that car had disappeared, one thought kept repeating in my mind. He hadn't been caught off guard. He hadn't panicked. He hadn't even rushed. He just timed it. And if he could do that, if he knew exactly how long he had, then this wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. They didn't let me drive the car. Not straight away. One of the officers called it in, spoke quietly into the radio for a minute or two, then came back and told me they'd get someone out to look at it properly. A recovery unit, he said. Standard procedure. Standard. That word stuck with me, because nothing about this felt standard. I stood off to the side while they worked, arms folded tight across myself, trying to keep some warmth in. The cold had settled deeper now, not just the air, but that lingering chill that comes after adrenaline burns out. Everything felt slightly unreal. The lights too bright, the empty car park too still. At one point, the younger officer walked a bit further out toward the edge of the services, scanning the access road again. He didn't say anything, but he kept looking, like he expected something to reappear. I followed his gaze instinctively. Nothing, just the curve of the ramp leading back up to the motorway. But the feeling didn't go, that sense that something had been there recently, something that could still come back. "You all right?" the older officer asked, stepping back toward me. I nodded automatically. "Yeah," I said, "just trying to understand it." He gave a small, tight nod. "Understand what?" "All of it," I said, gesturing vaguely around us. "This isn't just random, is it?" He didn't answer straight away. Instead, he glanced toward his colleague, then back at me. It was subtle, but it told me enough. "You're not the first to call something like this in," I continued quietly. Still nothing, just that same measured expression. "That's what it sounds like," I added. He exhaled slowly, shifting his weight slightly. "We get reports," he said at last. "Different areas, different times. That's not the same as random," I replied. "No," he said, "it's not." The honesty of that caught me off guard. I blinked, searching his face for something more. "Then what is it?" I asked. He hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough to make my chest tighten again. "People take advantage of situations," he said finally. "Quiet roads, tired drivers, isolated spots." "That sounds like you're describing a system," I said. Another pause, longer this time. "Then let's not jump ahead," he replied. "Not denial, just refusal." And that somehow was worse. The recovery truck arrived about 20 minutes later. The driver didn't ask many questions, just took one look under the bonnet, gave a low whistle, and shook his head slightly. "Clean cut," he muttered. "Whoever did that knew what they were doing." The older officer nodded once. "Seems that way." I watched them both for a second. "You've seen this before too?" I asked the driver. He gave a half shrug. "Seen similar," he said. "Usually not out here though." "Where then?" I pressed. He glanced at the officer before answering. "Lay-bys, industrial estates, quiet spots, anywhere you can get a car alone for a minute." Alone. That word again. It kept coming up, like everything circled back to it. They loaded my car onto the back of the truck while I stood off to the side, watching in silence. The whole process felt distant, like I was observing it from somewhere else rather than being part of it. Once it was secured, the older officer turned back to me. "We'll take a statement now," he said. "Then we'll arrange to get you somewhere safe." "Safe," I nodded. "All right." The station wasn't far, a small one tucked into the edge of a nearby town. Quiet, almost too quiet for something like this. They led me inside, sat me down in a small interview room, and handed me a cup of tea I didn't touch. I told them everything, or at least most of it. The motorway, the car following me, the lights, the services, the man, the way he'd circled the car, the way he'd left. I spoke more clearly than I expected to, more calmly, like something in me had shifted into a kind of detached focus. But I left one thing out: the paper, the number plate. I don't know why. At the time, it just felt too specific, too connected, like if I said it out loud, it would pull everything else into something more definite, something I wasn't ready to face. So I kept it to myself. When I finished, the room went quiet. The younger officer scribbled a few final notes. The older one sat back slightly, watching me. Then he said something that stayed with me more than anything else that night. "You did the right thing." Simple, straightforward. But the way he said it, it didn't sound reassuring. It sounded serious, like it mattered more than just this one situation. What would have happened if I hadn't? I asked quietly. He didn't answer straight away, just looked at me, measuring, the same way the man at the car had. Only this time, there was something else behind it. Concern, real concern. Finally, he spoke. "You didn't stop," he said. "You didn't engage. You stayed inside. You called for help." "That's not an answer," I said. "No," he agreed. "It's not." Another pause. "Then you don't need to know what might have happened," he added. My chest tightened. "That means it's worse than I'm thinking." He didn't respond, didn't deny it, just let the silence sit there between us. And that was the answer. They arranged a taxi to take me back to my aunt's. By the time I got there, it was late again. Later than I realized. The house was quiet, everyone asleep. I let myself in, moved slowly through the hallway, trying not to make noise. But as I passed the front window, I stopped. Something outside caught my eye. A shape, parked further down the lane. My breath caught instantly. A car, no headlights, no movement, just sitting there, watching. I stood completely still, my heart starting to pound again. "Not again," I whispered. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it, that it was just the reflection of something, or a neighbor's car. But then it moved, slowly, turning, pulling away from the edge of the lane. And as it did, I saw something that made the fear settle deeper than before. The headlights didn't come on, not once. It just slipped back into the dark, gone, like it had never been there at all. I stayed at the window for a long time after that, long enough for the silence to return, long enough for my breathing to steady. But one thought stayed with me, clear, unavoidable. This hadn't ended at the services. It hadn't even ended when I reached the station. Whatever this was, it didn't stop when you left the road. It just followed at a distance and waited. I didn't tell Oliver about the car that night. I stood there at the window for a long time after it disappeared, watching the empty stretch of lane like it might come back if I looked hard enough. But it didn't. The dark settled in again, quiet and still, like nothing had ever been there. Eventually, I stepped away, locked the door, checked it twice, then went upstairs and lay in bed, fully awake, staring into the dark. And that's when everything started to change. Up until that point, I'd been reacting, trying to keep up, trying to make sense of things as they happened. But now I was still. And my mind had space to catch up, to go back, to replay. And this time, it didn't feel like scattered memories. It felt like something lining up, piece by piece. The bus stop. I saw it clearly now. Not just as a strange detail, but as part of something. That suitcase, standing upright, clean, placed, not thrown, not abandoned in a hurry. Left where it would be noticed, just enough to catch attention, just enough to make someone slow down or stop. I turned slightly in bed, staring at the faint outline of the wardrobe in the dark. "That wasn't random," I whispered, because it wasn't. It had felt off at the time, but now it felt intentional, like a marker or a test. Then the silver estate, the first time I passed it. Hazard lights on, rear door slightly open, no one inside, no one nearby. That had been the second moment, the second chance, another invitation, another reason to stop, to check, to step out of the car. And if I'd walked toward it, my chest tightened at the thought, because I wouldn't have been in control of that situation. Not even slightly. Then the gateway. That one sat heavier than the rest, because that wasn't something they'd created. That was something I'd chosen. I pulled in there. I stopped. I gave them that moment. And the figure in the trees, that hadn't been chance. That had been waiting for someone like me, someone who needed a break, someone who thought they were just pausing for a minute. I pressed my eyes shut tightly, trying to slow my thoughts, but they kept coming, faster now, clearer. The man on the road, standing in front of the car, waving just enough to seem reasonable, not panicked, not injured, just enough to trigger that instinct, that automatic response. Someone needs help. That was the third step, and behind me, the second car, no headlights, silent, positioned perfectly, blocking the way back. That hadn't been improvised, that had been placed, timed, coordinated. I opened my eyes again, my breathing shallow. "No," I whispered. "No, but I couldn't finish it, because the pattern was there now, clear, undeniable. Then the services. I turned onto my side, staring toward the door. That part hadn't felt right at the time either. Too empty, too quiet, like a space that should have had people in it but didn't. And now Now I understood why that mattered. Because emptiness was the point. The car arriving without sound, parking too close, the man waiting inside, watching, letting me see just enough, letting me feel watched, letting the pressure build. And then, the car not starting, the engine dead, the escape gone. That wasn't coincidence. That wasn't bad luck. That was preparation. Someone had been there before I got back to the car, close enough, fast enough, confident enough to disable it in seconds. I sat up suddenly, the realization hitting harder now. They knew I'd go inside, I whispered. Of course they did. It was obvious. Anyone would. You stop at a service station, you go in, even for a minute, even just to check something. That was the gap. That was all they needed. I ran a hand through my hair, my heart starting to pound again. They didn't chase, I said quietly. That part kept coming back. None of them chased. Not the man on the lane, not the one at the car. Not even when I drove straight through their setup. They didn't panic, didn't react. They just let it happen. Because they didn't need to. Because there would be another chance. Another driver. Another night. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, suddenly unable to stay still. The room felt smaller now. Closer. Like the walls were pressing in slightly. I stood up, pacing once, twice, trying to shake the feeling, trying to break the chain of thoughts. But it didn't stop. The operator, I froze mid-step. That part hadn't made sense before. The way her tone had changed, the way she'd gone from routine to urgent the moment I mentioned being followed. That hadn't been standard. That had been recognition. And when I'd asked her about it, she hadn't denied it. She'd redirected, moved on, like there was something she wasn't meant to say. Then the officers. I turned slowly toward the window, the faint outline of the lane visible beyond the glass. They've seen it before, I whispered. The way they looked at each other, the way they hadn't seemed surprised, the way they'd already known what to check under the bonnet. That wasn't guesswork. That was experience. I wrapped my arms around myself again, the cold creeping back in. This isn't new. The words felt heavy, real, settled, because that was the truth. This wasn't a one-off. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't a strange, isolated incident. It was something that had been happening, quietly, repeatedly, in places like that. I walked slowly back to the window and looked out again. The lane was empty, still, peaceful, but I couldn't see it the same way anymore. Because now I understood something I hadn't before. The road hadn't been the danger, not by itself. The danger was how easy it was to end up there, how normal it felt, how many small, harmless decisions led to that exact situation. A missed turn, a moment of hesitation, a need to stop, a feeling of being tired, alone, uncertain. And once you were there, once you were in the right place, at the right time, you didn't need to be forced. You just needed to be guided. I pressed my hand lightly against the glass, staring out into the dark. They're not looking for everyone, I said quietly. That was the final piece, the one that made everything click. They're looking for the right ones. The ones who hesitate, the ones who second guess, the ones who try to be helpful or careful or reasonable. And the worst part, the part that made my stomach turn, was how close I'd come to being exactly that, every single time. I stepped back from the window slowly. The room felt colder now, quieter. And as I turned away, one thought settled into place. Clear, unavoidable. This wasn't something I'd escaped, not really. I'd just seen it early enough, understood it just in time, and somehow managed to leave before it finished. I should have left it there. That's the part that still bothers me now, because I had enough. More than enough. I could have gone home, written it off as something close, something I'd been lucky to get away from, and never thought about it again. But I didn't. Because once you see something like that, really see it, you can't just let it sit. You start needing to understand it, even if you know you shouldn't. The next morning felt almost normal. Too normal. Sunlight through the kitchen window. Kettle boiling. Oliver half asleep again, leaning against the counter while scrolling through his phone. It all felt disconnected from what had happened, like I'd stepped out of something and into a completely different world overnight. "You look worse today," he said casually. I gave a small shrug, forcing a smile. "Didn't sleep." "Yeah, you looked shaken when you got in," he replied. Still thinking about that drive, I hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, that was as far as I went, because I still wasn't ready to say it properly. Not out loud. But I did something else instead. Something quieter. Something that felt safer at the time. I checked the local reports, online first, then a few forums, then smaller community pages. Those local groups where people post about odd things, lost pets, suspicious vans. At first, nothing. Or at least nothing obvious. Just scattered comments, vague mentions. Strange car on the B road last night. Anyone else see someone standing by the old turnoff? Bit weird driving through there lately. Individually, they didn't mean much, but together, they started to feel familiar. Too familiar. I scrolled further. Found older posts, months back. A year, maybe more. Same kind of thing. Different roads, different people, but the same tone. Uncertain, unconfirmed. Like everyone was noticing something, but no one could quite define it. I leaned back in my chair slowly, staring at the screen. They're not talking about it properly, I murmured. Oliver glanced over. What? Nothing, I said quickly, closing the tab. Just work stuff. He nodded, already losing interest. And that was the problem. It was too easy to dismiss, too easy to overlook, because none of it sounded serious on its own. But I knew better now. Later that afternoon, I went back out to my car. The recovery truck had brought it back earlier that day, and it was sitting in the small gravel space beside the cottage, looking completely normal again, like nothing had ever happened. I stood there for a moment before unlocking it, taking a breath, trying to steady myself. Just check it, I said quietly. That's all. I opened the door, sat down. Everything looked the same, clean, unchanged. The ignition had been fixed. The engine started without hesitation. No sign of damage, no sign of interference. Except I knew better. I knew how easily it had been done, how quickly. That hadn't changed. I reached over and opened the glove compartment. The paper was still there, folded, exactly where I'd left it. For a moment, I just stared at it. Then slowly, I picked it up again, unfolded it. The same writing, the same time, the same number plate. I read it once, then again. And this time, I didn't just recognize it. I decided to check it. I shouldn't have. I know that now. But at the time, it felt like the only way to confirm anything. I typed it into my phone. Simple search, nothing official, but enough to bring something up. A match, not recent, not detailed, just a mention. Buried in a thread from months ago, a comment, someone describing a similar situation. A car parked strangely on a rural road, a number plate partially remembered. Close enough that my chest tightened instantly. No, I whispered. I scrolled further. More comments, more fragments, a pattern forming again. People seeing the same car, in different places, at different times, always late, always on quieter roads. My hands started to shake again, slower this time, colder, because this wasn't just a theory anymore. This was evidence, not official, not confirmed, but real enough. I locked the car again and stepped back. The air felt different now, heavier, like the space around me had shifted slightly. I turned toward the lane, half expecting, no, dreading to see something there again. But it was empty, still, quiet. That should have reassured me, but it didn't, because now I understood something I hadn't before. The car I'd seen the night before, outside the cottage, that hadn't been random either. I stepped slowly toward the edge of the gravel, looking out over the narrow stretch of road. They followed, I said quietly, not just on the motorway, not just to the services, all the way, or at least far enough, close enough to know where I'd gone. A chill ran through me, because that meant this wasn't contained to one place, one road, one setup. It moved, adapted, followed. I wrapped my arms around myself again, staring out into the distance. They don't just wait, I whispered. That had been the assumption, that they stayed in those places, set up their traps, waited for someone to pass through. But now I wasn't so sure. Because if they could follow, if they could track, if they could appear again, even after I'd left, then this wasn't just something you drove into. It was something that could stay with you. I stepped back slowly, turning toward the cottage again, every instinct in me telling me to go inside, to close the door, to shut it all out. But as I reached for the handle, one final thought settled in. Clear, sharp, unavoidable. I hadn't been chosen at random, not completely. Not just because I was there, because I'd reacted, because I'd hesitated, because I'd noticed. And that might have been the real mistake. Because now I couldn't stop thinking about it, couldn't stop seeing the pattern, couldn't stop looking for it. And something about that felt dangerous in a way I couldn't explain. Like noticing it, understanding it, meant I wasn't just someone who passed through anymore. I was someone who knew. And that might mean they knew that too. I didn't feel safe driving home. Not properly. Even in daylight. Even on main roads. Even with traffic around me. Because once you see something like that, once you understand even a piece of it, you stop trusting the idea that safety is about where you are. It's about whether you've been noticed. I left early, earlier than I needed to. I didn't say much to Oliver when I was going, just that I wanted to get back before it got dark. He nodded, didn't question it, probably assuming I was still shaken from the drive. He wasn't wrong, he just didn't know how much. "Take it easy, yeah?" he said as I grabbed my keys. "Yeah," I replied. "I will." But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't something I could control anymore. The first hour was quiet, uneventful, normal, and that was almost worse, because it gave me time to think. Too much time. Every car behind me felt like a question. Every lane change felt like something I had to justify. Every set of headlights that lingered too long in the mirror made my chest tighten just slightly. I kept checking, constantly, more than I ever had before, not just for the same car, but for patterns. That was the difference now. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was looking, actively, watching the road the way they might, and that changed everything. By the time I reached the motorway again, the sky had started to darken slightly. Not fully evening, just that dull shift where the light flattens and everything loses a bit of clarity. I stayed in the middle lane, keeping a steady speed, trying to blend in. That felt important now. Not standing out, not drawing attention, just being another car. For a while it worked. No one followed too closely, no strange movements, no flashing lights, nothing. And slowly, very slowly, I started to relax. Not completely, but enough that my shoulders dropped slightly. Enough that I stopped gripping the wheel so tightly. Enough that I told myself, maybe it really is over. And then I saw it. Not behind me, not at first. Ahead, parked on the hard shoulder, a silver estate. My breath caught instantly. The same shape, same model, same dull shine under the fading light. I felt that cold rush of recognition hit before I could even think. "No," I whispered. As I got closer, I slowed slightly, my eyes locked on it. It wasn't identical. Not exactly. Different angle, different position. But close enough that my brain refused to dismiss it. The hazard lights weren't on. The car was just sitting there, still, quiet, waiting. I should have driven past. I knew that. I told myself that. But something made me look, just for a second, into the rear passenger window. And that was enough. Because this time, it wasn't empty. There was someone sitting inside, perfectly still, facing forward, not looking at me, not reacting, just there. My chest tightened sharply as I drove past, my pulse jumping again. "That's not the same car," I said under my breath, but it didn't matter because it wasn't about that anymore. It was about the pattern. I checked my mirror. The car stayed where it was, didn't move, didn't pull out, didn't follow, just remained on the shoulder, like it had nothing to do with me at all. And that was what made it worse, because that's exactly how it had started the first time. I forced myself to look forward again. "Keep driving," I whispered. "Just keep driving." But my thoughts were racing now, faster than before, louder, because something had shifted, again. It wasn't just one place. It wasn't just one group. It wasn't even just one car. It was a method, a system, something that could exist anywhere the conditions were right. I swallowed hard, my hands tightening on the wheel again. "They don't need to follow," I said quietly. That had been my mistake, thinking this was about being tracked, about being chosen and chased, but that wasn't it, not entirely. They just needed enough of them, enough places, enough opportunities. The road stretched ahead, cars passing, lorries shifting lanes, everything normal, everything exactly as it should be. And yet it didn't feel like it anymore. Because now I understood something I couldn't unsee. I wasn't looking for them anymore. I was looking for signs, small things, details, moments that didn't quite fit. And once you start doing that, once you start noticing, you realize something terrifying. There are more of those moments than there should be. A car sitting too still, a driver not reacting, a lane that empties too quickly, a space that feels too quiet. They're easy to ignore, easy to explain away, easy to forget. Unless You've seen what happens when you don't. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady myself, trying to stop the spiral of thoughts before it pulled me under again. "You're fine," I said. "You're on a main road. There are people everywhere." That was true. It had to be. But even as I said it, even as I tried to hold on to that, I checked the mirror again. And for just a second, I thought I saw something. Not a car, not clearly, just a gap, a stretch of road behind me that felt too empty. Then it was gone, filled again by traffic, normal, nothing unusual. I swallowed, forcing myself to look forward, to focus, to keep moving. But the thought didn't leave. It stayed there, quiet, persistent. That this wasn't about being followed, not really. It was about being noticed. And once that happened, once you fit the pattern, you didn't need to be chased, because sooner or later, you'd end up in the right place again. And next time, you might not realize it in time. I made it home before dark. That should have been the end of it. That's what anyone else would say anyway. You got out, you're back, you're safe. Whatever that was, it's behind you now. But it didn't feel like that, not even close, because the strangest part of all of it, the part I still can't properly explain, is that nothing followed me home, not physically. No car waiting outside, no headlights lingering at the end of the street, no figure standing where it shouldn't be. Everything looked exactly as it always had, and somehow, that was worse. The first night back, I didn't go out. I didn't even open the curtains after it got dark. I told myself it was just exhaustion, that I needed rest, that everything would feel different in the morning, that once I got back into routine, back into normal life, this would settle into something distant, something manageable. But it didn't, because normal doesn't come back properly once you've seen something like that. It just pretends. The next day, I drove to work. Daylight again. Traffic. People. Noise. Everything safe on the surface. And yet, I still checked my mirrors more than I needed to. Still noticed cars that stayed behind me a bit too long. Still felt that slight tightening in my chest when something didn't quite line up the way it should. I didn't trust it anymore. Any of it. That's when I realized the worst part of all this wasn't what had happened. It was what it had done to the way I saw everything after. Because now, every quiet road felt like a possibility. Every empty lay-by felt like a setup. Every car pulled over at night felt like something I should never go near. And maybe that sounds paranoid. Maybe it is. But I also know this. I wasn't wrong. Not once. I started avoiding night drives completely. At first, it was just an excuse. I'm tired. I've got an early start. I'll go in the morning. But eventually, it stopped being an excuse. It became a rule, one I didn't break. And still, it stayed with me. Not constantly, not in a way that took over everything, but in small moments, quiet ones. Like when I'm driving and I notice a car sitting just off the road a bit too neatly, or when I see headlights in the distance that don't quite behave the way they should, or when I pass a turning that looks like it leads somewhere it shouldn't. Those moments stick. They linger longer than they used to, because now I don't just see them, I understand what they could be. I never told the police about the paper. I don't know why. Part of me thought they already knew more than they were saying. Part of me didn't want to be pulled deeper into it. But mostly, I think I didn't want to make it more real than it already was. I kept it. It's still in my car, folded, tucked away. I don't take it out. I don't show anyone. But sometimes I check that it's still there, just to remind myself I didn't imagine any of it. Because the truth is, what scares me most isn't what happened. It's how easily it could happen again. Not to me, necessarily, but to anyone. Someone driving late, someone tired, someone who misses a turn, someone who sees a car stopped on the side of the road and thinks, I should check that. That's all it takes. And once you're in it, once you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, it doesn't feel like a trap. Not at first. It feels like a situation you can manage, something you can reason your way through, something you can fix, until you realize you're not the one in control. And by then, it's already too late. I still think about the way he looked at me. Not angry, not desperate, not even particularly threatening, just certain. Like he'd done it before, like he'd do it again. And maybe that's the part I'll never shake. Because I got out. I drove away. I made the right decisions just in time. But it didn't feel like I escaped something that failed. It felt like I left something that still works. So if you ever find yourself alone on a road that doesn't feel right, if something seems off, even slightly, if you get that quiet feeling in your chest telling you to stop or to check, don't. Don't second guess it. Don't try to be helpful. Don't convince yourself it's nothing. Just leave. Because whatever's out there, it doesn't need to force you. It doesn't need to chase you. It just needs you to hesitate. And if you do, even for a second, you might not get the chance I did. And no one will ever know how close you were. If this story stirred something within you, be it a flicker of unease, curiosity, or deep reflection, please leave a comment and share your thoughts. What do you think is truly going on? Have you ever experienced a sense of uncanny familiarity like that before? If you have similar stories of your own, don't hesitate to share them. Who knows? Maybe we are all touching upon the same hidden frequency. And if you want to keep exploring these dramatic, mysterious, and multi-layered tales, please hit the like button to support the channel and subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming chapters. Wishing you a truly peaceful night where everything is still in the gentlest way, and may there always be a spark of warm light somewhere waiting for you to find it.